Alright, the last part I'm going to talk about is the place state, the degree, the number of turning points, the roots, multiplicities, and behavior, and whether or not the polynomial crosses or touches at the x-axis. And then we need to sketch. Alright, so a couple things that we might have noticed is that if we have an odd multiplicity, it is going to cross the x-axis, versus if it has an even multiplicity, for example, like at x equals 7, it's going to come down and then it's going to get rejected. It's something that we talked about maybe a little bit last time. Alright, so if I have my degree, let's just go in order. So my degree, if I multiplied all this out, I would get an x cubed as my eventual term, because this part would give me an x squared, and then this part would just give me x squared times x if I had to multiply that all out. So my lead term would be 3, meaning that my degree would be 3. My turning points, no, TP does not mean toilet paper in this class. Turning points, so if my degree is n, which is 3, my turning points is at most n minus 1. So it could be having 2 turning points, or after we do this whole n minus 1 thing, after that would just be minus 2 every single time until we get down to 0 or negative numbers. Alright, so 2 or 0. So it can be 0, it cannot be negative number of turning points, because there's no way that you can't just not avoid I don't even know how to put that if I had a negative number of turning points, to be honest. Alright, my roots should be at 4 and at negative 6. That's just coming from these factors if I set them equal to 0. Alright, my root of 4 has a multiplicity of 1. And my negative 6 has a multiplicity of 2. My end behavior, there's a couple different ways to do this. One is something called sign charts. The other one is literally go plug in a number, which I'm going to do with a sign chart anyway. Or, yeah, that's the only 2 ways I know. So sign chart, I've definitely got negative 6 and 4 being my important points. If I plug in anything before negative 6, it's going to be negative. If I plug in anything in between, I believe it's positive. So if I plugged in 0, nope. And, sorry, my computer is being weird. So it would have been positive times a negative if I plugged in 0. So that would be all in all negative. And then if I plugged in anything above 4, it should just be positive. So that would be positive and a positive. So positive times positive, just going to give me positive. So I should have my graph touching at 4. And then it's going to touch at negative 6. So I should cross at 4 and touch at negative 6. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Positive 4, 1, 2, 3, 4. Alright. So I know before negative 6, it's negative, it's negative, it's negative. I know that I got rejected at 6, so I went back down, but at some point it's going to turn back up and go back to 4, because that's my other point that it says, hey, I have to touch this x-axis. And then at 4, it's going to cross that x-axis because it has an odd multiplicity. Alright, next one I'm going to factor. So I've got x squared times x squared minus 3. Alright, so I have a degree of 4, which means my turning points can be either 3, doing the n minus 1, and then I subtract 2 every time, all the way down to 0, so 3 or 1. If I subtract 2 again, I get a negative 1, which isn't possible to have a negative number of turning points. My 3, actually, is just my number of turning points. Alright, so what are my roots? Well, my roots, I would have to set this x squared is equal to 0, so setting that equal to 0, I would just get x is equal to 0. But then if I set x squared minus 3 is equal to 0, now I'm going to have to solve for x. So I've got x squared is equal to positive 3, so x should be equal to plus or minus the square root of 3. So my roots are positive square root of 3, negative square root of 3, and 0. Alright, so my 0 has a multiplicity of 2. My square root of 3 has a multiplicity of 1. My negative square root of 3 has a multiplicity of 1, because that's only going to show up in my answers once. Alright, so it should be like 1.7-ish, which is about here. And here, other than that, it's 0. Gross. Alright. End behavior, what the graph is literally doing at the ends of my graph. So I've got negative square root of 3, I've got 0, I've got positive square root of 3. If I plug in anything before negative square root of 3, it should be positive. And then if I plug in anything between those two, for example, negative 1, I should get a negative number. If I plug in anything between 0 and square root of 3, for example, 1, I should still get a negative number. And if I plug in anything after square root of 3, I should get a positive number again. Alright, and that makes sense, because at square root of 3, it should cross. So I'm not going to use a plus for a cross, but at 1, it's going to cross. At negative square root of 3, it's going to cross. And at 0, it's just going to touch. Alright, so my graph should end up looking something like cross, touch, cross. And then you're done.